In today's episode, manager forces me to get a doctor's note despite it being illegal to do so. Doctor writes him the most passive-aggressive note, signing me off for 2 weeks instead of 2 days to teach him a lesson. I have to work on Saturdays and choose 3 days a week for overtime. Okay, boss, got it. Followed their wording exactly. Work fridge story. So let's get started. Manager forces me to get a doctor's note despite it being illegal to do so. Doctor writes him the most passive-aggressive note, signing me off for 2 weeks instead of 2 days to teach him a lesson. When I was in my early 20s, I worked at a supermarket. I should note that I was a pretty reliable employee. I was never late, in fact, I often got in early, and I rarely called in sick. At the time this happened, I had not called in sick for 9 months, and even then, the manager had sent me home. I had been up all night, swinging between burning hot and freezing cold, so I was obviously feverish, and I had been throwing up at both ends, shall we say. At one point at about 2 a.m. I was on the toilet, with my head in the sink, utterly miserable. I must have passed out, because the next thing I knew I was lifting my head off the sink, and it was 7 a.m. I was due to start work at 12 that day, but that obviously wasn't going to happen. So I called up the manager. Let's call the manager Steve. Steve was known for being a real a-hole. He never believed anyone who called in sick except his best buds, usually other managers, never lowly staff, but often called in sick himself. A lot of the time we knew it was because he was hungover and not actually sick. The conversation went as follows. Me, hey Steve, sorry, I can't come in. I'm sick. Steve, with what? Me, I don't know. I think it might be the flu. I've been up all night being sick, and I have a fever. Steve, don't be stupid. If you had the flu, you'd be completely knocked out. I need you in. Come in, or you're fired. Me, I can't. I just told you I can't stop vomiting. I passed out. Steve, growling angrily, either come in or bring a doctor's note, or you're fired. In the UK, you are legally allowed to self-certify for 5 days. This means you can tell your employer you are sick, and you do not need a doctor's note. If you're sick for more than 5 days, you then need a note. It is also illegal to demand a doctor's note during the self-certify period. I knew this, but I was terrified. This was during the recession. I couldn't afford to lose my job. So I got myself dressed. Almost passed out trying to do so. Then trudged to the doctor's some 25 minutes walk away. I end up sitting in the doctor's office for a little over an hour, which for walk-in was pretty good. I get in to see the doctor, and she is furious at me for coming in. You're not supposed to come to the doctor's when you have a cold or flu, and of course I knew I should be able to self-certify. She told me as such, saying I shouldn't be here and should have stayed at home. I then explained what had happened with Steve, and how he had threatened to fire me over this, and I couldn't afford to lose my job. I was struggling as it was. My doctor turned her anger towards my manager. She asked if I got sick pay from the company, and I said yes. He wants a sick note, does he? The doctor says. Okay. I'll give him a sick note. Now, my manager just wanted a note confirming I was sick, but instead my doctor wrote something along the lines of this. My name has come to the surgery because manager name has insisted she come in spite of the fact that this is illegal and all employees are allowed to self-certify. Due to being forced to make this unnecessary and highly dangerous trip when the patient is ill, has a fever of 39 degrees Celsius, and almost passed out in the waiting room, I am signing my name off for 2 full weeks to recover. Had my name been allowed to self-certify as is the law, they might only have needed a few days, but due to straining themselves, they now require 2 full weeks. They are not to be permitted to work until date 2 weeks later. The doctor said she would have signed me off longer, but this was the longest she could do without requiring further evidence. So basically, instead of just being off for a few days, I was now signed off for a full 2 weeks, and I'd be paid for it. I went to my place of work, at which point one of the duty managers saw me and asked me what the heck I was doing here. Go home, I was obviously very unwell. I explained what happened. They agreed to help me downstairs to Steve's office and went with me inside. I handed Steve the note. He looked worried and tried to say I wasn't being serious about firing you. Well, gee, when you angrily growled it down the phone, it sure sounded like it. The duty manager then declared that they were going to drive me home. It was clear Steve wanted to argue, but had the sense to know he shouldn't. The duty manager then drove me home, made sure I was okay, then went back to work where they informed our union rep of what had happened. Steve had a disciplinary hearing where he was given a severe reprimand and a warning. Steve tried to argue he never said I'd be fired, and I was lying and just decided to go to the doctors, but the duty manager said they heard him admit to it when he said to me that he really didn't mean it. I felt better after a few days and enjoyed my 2 weeks off, fully paid, and enjoyed the nice weather we had. Meanwhile, Steve was forced to work overtime because we were short-staffed. So thanks to the doctor, instead of being off for a few days, I ended up getting a nice 2-week paid vacation, and Steve was given a final warning, all because he insisted I get a doctor's note. I have to work on Saturdays and choose 3 days a week for overtime. Okay, boss, got it. First off, sorry for the bad formatting as I am on my phone, and I do apologize for any grammatical errors as English is not my first language. So I was fresh out of college and was working at a call center as a side gig till I find a career, and I managed to land a job at one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country. I started working with them on the 25th of December, yet my contract stated my starting date was the 1st of January. Turns out it's just to cover their asses, but I didn't mind. I signed the contract and I went down to the financial manager as I was hired as an accountant, first day of work, and we are auditing the warehouse department, no big deal. But what transpired next is what pissed me off. You see, I was supposed to cover for accounts payable, which is easy and not a lot of work. Most of the time the invoices or checks are stuck in the process due to something unrelated on my end. My boss, however, wanted me to do a lot of overtime. It was paid, of course, but I hated it as it was a 3 hours commute from home, and by the time I got home I was tired and went to bed immediately. Worst part was I didn't even have much to do, and this has been going on constantly to the degree that the financial manager was involved, and he ordered me to work overtime for 3 days a week and come to work on Saturdays. And this is where I complied. You see, on Saturdays no one is at the office, same with overtime, so what I do is walk out of the office and take an hour or two smoke break and come back inside, browse my phone, and do nothing. This went on till he learned about it. He wasn't pleased and he started assigning more tasks, even some outside my job description. I kept going with the flow until I learned that the financial manager wouldn't renew my contract. You see, he wanted me to go to work on a Saturday that wasn't agreed upon. They called me on Thursday at 5:30 p.m., and when I refused they told me to remember that I chose this way. So they brought in a new guy and had me teach him. At that point I dropped all pretense and said F***ck it. Might as well have fun, and started slacking at my job. When the new guy arrived, my boss literally told me that he is the one to do everything. I wasn't even allowed to use my work laptop anymore or my Oracle credentials, and so it began. I taught the guy everything I knew because it wasn't his fault, but I soon gave up because he was as dense as a harem anime protagonist. Fast forward a bit, we had a COVID policy as this happened last year, and it stated that if you had the symptoms you were entitled for 14 days quarantine and 1 free PCR test, and even if the PCR came out negative you still had to stay at home for the 14 days. So what I did was I faked the symptoms, I didn't take my BP medication, and I didn't drink water that day. I also didn't take anything for my allergies, so I played sick, was taken to the clinic, and I was given an emergency ride home and a fully paid 14 days sick leave that was in tune with my last working day. Followed their wording exactly. Work fridge story. A work refrigerator story reminded me of my compliance glory. I worked retail where the rules were police ourselves when it comes to food items. Put your name on things and most things got pitched on Tuesdays. Got it easy. Worked beautifully for a couple of years until a new HR manager came in guns blazing. New rules include name and date on items. Anything without the date would be pitched. I was a packer, as in a lunchbox. I took this lunch box home daily. Leading up to the compliance, in my floral lunch bag I had a lovely piece of lasagna to warm up. I dreamed of my lasagna. When I finally got to my lunch, late might I add, I strolled to the second fridge on the right. My lunch box was nowhere to be seen. Come to find it in the trash with too much nasty to retrieve on top of it. I was fuming. I had written my name many moons ago. I however did not write the date because it's a lunchbox. The date changes regularly. I storm into the HR office and tell them someone threw away my lunchbox. The new but very rude high and mighty HR woman stated that per company policy all items need the date written on them each day. She printed off and highlighted the portion that says all items must say today's date. I thought to myself, okay, I can do that, and kept this form. On my lunch break I bought a new lunchbox, containers, and a luggage tag. When I got home I wrote the words today's date on the luggage tag. Brought my second piece of lasagna for lunch in my new bag plus tag combo. Wouldn't you know it, about 11 a.m. I heard my name over the intercom to come to HR. Where I found the HR lady and my assistant manager with my lunch bag. HR, is this a joke? Holding my lunch box like it has the plague. Me, no, it's lunch. HR, you are supposed to write the date on your items. She's pretty annoyed but feeling superior. Me, no, per company policy it states to write today's date on all items. I whipped out the highlighted form from my pocket and showed my manager and HR. Manager, yup. That's what it says, all right, and says my tag is in compliance. HR didn't say much, but gets mad and makes my life difficult for about a year before leaving the company. My manager did say what I did was funny but unnecessary. Hey, she made me mad and others followed suit. Lunch boxes with luggage tags as far as the eye could see. Even after she left. Better safe than sorry. Thanks for watching.